Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you all for coming here this afternoon, and thank you, Carol, for the introduction. I did not expect to be introduced myself. But thank you, and by the way, in some circles, it is actually okay to use the word communist in Africa, so. It gives me really great pleasure to introduce to you Ms. Nyaradzayi Gumbonzvanda, who is a dear friend and fellow activist, and she's also a remarkable leader with high commitment, energy, and passion for women's human rights, social justice, and gender equality. And you will know what I'm talking about when she starts speak here. Her speech here on this podium, at this podium. Nyaradzayi is, by the way, she has a very long and interesting CV. But of course, I decided against sharing all of her accomplishments with you because this would require me to speak for the rest of this afternoon. So I decided to write a very brief introduction. And then, before I knew it, I found out that I have written an article, something that's in the form of an article, complete with the title, "May the Likes of Her Multiply." Of course, this is the title of a book by Evelyn Booth. It's about women's biographies in the Middle East and North Africa, but it's also a translation of a saying, that people use in my country when they speak about a really accomplished, but also, motivating and compassionate leader. So, may the likes of her multiply. Nyaradzayi is a human rights lawyer with an MA in constitutional property law from the University of South Africa and a Bachelor of Law with honors from the University of Zimbabwe. She also completed graduate studies at Uppsala University in Sweden. She is the executive director of the Rosaria Memorial Trust, an organization that she founded to honor her late mother, and that is carrying out really exciting work in Zimbabwe, her home country, and also globally. She is the African Union's Goodwill Ambassador for the campaign to end child marriage in Africa. This is an important topic that affects people, many women and communities globally, but also here in the United States, by the way. This is also one of the key themes that we are addressing this semester, by the way, in the Advanced Topics in Human Rights course here at UMass Boston. This is the core course in the Human Rights curriculum. I first met Ms. Gumbonzvanda in 2006 in Nairobi. At the time, she was the executive director of the UNIFEM office in East Africa. And in that capacity, she carried out very remarkable work in order to mobilize women and to involve them in the many peace processes that were ongoing at the time, including in my country of origin, Sudan, not taking no for an answer. And I don't want to elaborate on that at present. She has also held several other appointments within the United States and within the United Nations, and she has been on several very important and high-level commissions. These include the Commission on Information and Accountability on Women and Children's Health, the Steering Committee for the Gender is My Agenda campaign, and the high-level group on HIV prevention and sexual health for young people in Eastern and Southern Africa. She was the first president from the Global South to serve on the NGO's Committee on the Status of Women in Geneva. Nyaradzayi has been also active within civil society, and using that hat, she has been in many ways also sometimes critical of global policy discourses, by the way. She is the chair of the International Board of Action Aid International and is a board member of several other international organizations. Between 2007 and 2016, she was the Secretary General of the Worldwide WCA, an impressive movement that reaches 25 million women and girls in 120 countries. In that capacity, Nyaradzayi mobilized women from around the world to advocate around what matters most in their communities at the global level. And she brought young women on one hand and senior level, senior leaders on the other. And those include heads of heads of state and government, leaders of UN agencies, as well as international organizations and philanthropic groups together in very exciting and productive intergenerational dialogues. She continues to create such dynamic spaces at present, and a recent example is actually a small village or a girls' room that she created at the most recent session of the Commission of the Status of Women, which took place in New York during the past 2 weeks. In this space, just over 2 weeks, I had the opportunity to speak with a number of women, young women from several African countries, who are working on various issues, a wide range of issues actually, as well as to women, immigrants and refugees in Europe who are originally from Africa, who actually reflected on their hybrid identities and on other key important issues. Yet in the same space, it is not uncommon to meet Mary Robinson, the former president of Ireland and the former High Commissioner for Human Rights. So these spaces really bring the diverse individuals together in equal and productive discussions. Needless to say, of course, Nyaradzayi has received many awards for her work over the years. She recently launched a special initiative, the Girls' Opportunities Fund, to further her cause and commitment to education and health for girls, especially in rural communities and particularly in Africa. Of course, I could go on and on, but we also want to hear from our distinguished guests. So please join me in welcoming Nyaradzayi Gumbonzvanda.
Caro and Nada, thank you for this warm welcome. I work in the village, so this podium is so difficult for me. Now I have to learn to be a professor. Do you learn to be a professor, or you read and are conferred to be a professor? It's such a pleasure for me to be at this university and to be at this multi-institutes. It's a collaborative, which also in itself shows that the conversation we are having today is not a single narrative. It's a complex. It has its complexities grounded in multiple narratives. When I received the invitation to come and share with you, and Brittany here started all the emails about flights. I'd never been to Boston. I'd always wanted to come here. So I said, I'll clear my calendar for whatever it takes. But I also wanted to be here knowing that the issue we are talking about is a global issue. The context, the issue of child alien forced marriage is not only an issue that is evident in the global south. We also have legislation in this country where marriage is allowable for girls under the age of 16. So for me, it was part of coming to share the global perspective, but more specifically grounded within the Africa experience, and much more so to say we need to lift the conversation in this country and also advocate for appropriate legislation to protect the rights of girls. My topic is securing rights, unleashing potential for young women and girls within the context of child marriage, and sharing the experiences of Africa. I often start from declaring that I don't know whether I am a product of love or I am a product of biology. My mother did not choose my father. Neither do I believe that I was a planned or unwanted pregnancy. I'm her 14th pregnancy. She was barely 14, barely 13, when she was taken out of class and was shown this man who then became my father. So I can anticipate that her first sexual encounter was not like consensual. Definitely it wasn't. It was not pleasurable. Definitely it was not. And definitely it was rape. I'm talking of my own parents. So the issue of child marriage is very personal to me, just as much as it is a deep political issue. In the time that I have, I would like to cover 5 main domains in this conversation. So the first is to locate the conceptual framework within which we are engaging on the issues on ending child early and forced marriage, and within that to question some of the dominant narratives that are very limiting in the current discourse on ending child marriage. Secondly, I will run through some of the causes and consequences of child early and forced marriage with an assumption that we also have our own interpretation of what those causes and consequences are, and therefore I would pass by that discussion. I will spend a little bit of time on the Africa continental effort and the campaign to end child marriage as a practice. I usually don't like the word best practice, but it's just a practice. It's just an example of some of the work that is happening, and to be able to say what are its key elements, and within it then go much more deeply to therefore what are the key elements of securing rights. What are those elements that are within the dimension of securing rights, and would end with a substantive conversation on unleashing potential. And therefore, what does it take to, if you secure rights, it doesn't necessarily mean that you unleash potential. You need to do something more and extra. And what is that which we need to do? The conversation, the issue of ending child marriage has become a global public policy, a human rights issue, much more fundamentally, especially after the adoption of the Sustainable Development Goals in 2015, in which gender equality is one of the key goals. It's SDG 5, the Sustainable Development Goal 5. And for us to measure achievement on achieving gender equality, we have ending harmful practices, such as child marriage and female genital mutilation, as an indicator of achievement or of progress towards the SDGs. So it meant the member states globally, this issue is now part of public policy. And within it is my first interaction, is my first interrogation, that it's so much framed within the gender equality discourse, but is described as a harmful practice. Yes, it is a harmful practice, and it is more than a harmful practice. So my conceptual framework in my work on ending child early and forced marriage is that what we are talking about is human rights. It's about human rights. It's a rights issue in which multiple rights are violated. It is not just a harmful practice, it is fundamentally a violation of many, many rights. It is also an example of the intersectionality of human rights. The girls, just for me, my discourse is going to start with the child marriage. Girls are human beings with rights. They are rights holders. The moment they get married, it means their basic right of choice, of choosing who to marry, is violated. Their right to education is curtailed. Their right to health is compromised. Their right to participation is narrowed. So we are essentially talking about a human rights violation, which is more than just a harmful practice. We are also placing the issue of child marriage as a justice issue. We need to bring much more the justice discourse. We know justice is part of accountability related to human rights. So it's so much a justice issue. But in the current work, there is very limited work happening around justice dimension of child early and forced marriage. It's so much more around prevention, but not sufficiently around justice. So I just want us to hold in our hand that this is also a justice issue. It is a security issue, personal security of girls. The greatest insecurity of a woman is when you are unable to protect this being, and somebody can just decide who you are going to live with for the rest of your life. And that being compromised in a way that you live with the trauma of violation for the rest of your life. But it is also a security issue within the context of where child marriage happens. Yes, it happens in stable context where there is poverty or no poverty, but it also happens in situations of war. So conflict and violence exacerbates the practice and the experience of child early and forced marriage. I'm just so excited to have Kosa with us, who introduced herself before the session, and she talked about being in a refugee camp and then getting married. So essentially, I think later she can share her own experiences. So it's a rights issue, it's a justice issue, it's a security issue, and it's a development issue. Child marriage is a development issue because it is the failure. It shows the failure of development to protect and to provide services. To protect, the duty to protect, the protection is so much embedded in children's rights discourse. And yet child marriage is violating that basic understanding that parents, as rights holders, as duty bearers, that the community has to protect and to support the evolving of the children to be adults with potential. And therefore, when you marry your child, you are actually not protecting because you are abusing that same child. It is also the failure of development because it's about access to education, comprehensive sexuality education. It's about access to services, to commodities, to social care, to social welfare. So all that is part of the development discourse. So I strongly believe that our work on human rights, especially for us in the academia, we really need to advance the discourse that child marriage, child early and forced marriage is not just a harmful practice. It is a human rights issue. It is a justice issue. It is an issue of human security. And it is a development issue. Secondly, I want to move a little bit more to language. As we know, naming is norming. The norms are defined by the names and the description to which we define and we explain and describe facts and circumstances. What we are calling child marriage, for me, is a misnomer. We are sanitizing and legalizing and normalizing a human rights violation by calling it a marriage. There's nothing called child marriage because under international human rights law, a child cannot marry. A child has no legal capacity to marry. The Convention on the Rights of the Child says marriage is of adults of the age 18. Of course, the convention, we still want to move for amendments here and there, but in my work in Africa, the African Charter on the Rights and Welfare of the Child says the age of marriage is 18 with no exception. So if the age of marriage is 18 with no exception, it means child marriage does not exist. It's void by definition. We cannot put the two together. A marriage is an agreement between two adults, two consenting adults of age 18. So where there is child marriage, there's no consent, and there are no adults consenting. Therefore, what we are calling child marriage is essentially child sexual exploitation, it's rape, it is abduction, because if this girl of 12 years has not given consent and has moved from this family to this house without her consent, it means she's being abducted. That's what abduction means, is being physically removed without your consent and being moved to another space to be a place where you're living. So it's abduction. It is defined as trafficking. there is more and more literature which is saying child marriage is human trafficking. You are moving girls from one place to the other, at times from one country to the other, from one part of the country to the other. So it is human trafficking, because also it is transactional in many instances. And it is a modern form of slavery. The Human Rights Commission has come up very clearly and say what we are calling child marriage is a modern form of slavery. We are calling it a modern form of slavery because this little girl who must be in school is now waking up at 4 a.m. in many of our contexts in Africa to fetch water for a family which is like 7 people in the household, to go and weed in the field, to cook for everybody, to fend in her field, and she's not paid. And then she's forced to have sex and has many children like my mother did. So it is a modern form of slavery. And therefore, we need to move the language so that we do not continue to talk about child marriage. If we have to, we need to put the word marriage in quotation marks so that we are questioning the terminology. The words that are usually used is child, early, and forced marriage. So I've described child marriage, that a person under 18 cannot consent to marriage. So what is early marriage? Early marriage is a sociological term than a legal term. Early marriage simply means you are not ready. You may be 28 years old and you were not ready for this marriage, and you had to enter this marriage because of so many other factors. So early marriage is also prohibited because we are saying there are so many push factors which is pushing young women into marriage when they are not ready. It could be pregnancy. In many of our contexts, once you get pregnant, you have to go to the author of that pregnancy. Even if it was a result of rape, even if it was unwanted or unplanned, or even if it's your sweetheart but you are not ready. Having sex should not be equal to marriage. So early marriage is associated with the readiness of a woman to enter into a binding relationship with this guy. Forced marriage is where you do not have consent. It doesn't matter the age. As we said, marriage is about consent of two adults. And where there is no consent, it means there is forced marriage. No consent either legally or no consent even when you are over 18. So what we are talking about is not anecdotal. It's, the numbers are staggering. The numbers are staggering. Today, UNICEF has released recent data which is saying 12 million girls are forced into marriage or experience child marriage every year worldwide. 12 million. That's the population of my country. 12 million every year. Just imagine 12 million incidences of sexual violence. 12 million incidences of the little girls being forced into a relationship. 12 million this year, 12 million next year, 12 million the previous year. 650 million women alive today have experienced child marriage. That's the data from the UN. 650 million women alive today have experienced child marriage. That's mind-blowing. 38% of the marriages are in sub-Saharan Africa. And we see some of the countries in sub-Saharan Africa, like Niger, Burkina Faso, Mali, with over 70% prevalence rate. 70% of the girls are married under the age of 18. Then we see some countries, Ethiopia, Somalia, Mozambique, with prevalence rates of ranging between 40 and 50%. My country, Zimbabwe, is 30%. Statistics are important but insufficient. One rape is one too many. It's not about the numbers. It's about saying no to this gross violation of rights of our girls, and us standing tall and saying it's unacceptable. What are the causes of this child marriage? What is happening? What really is underlying child marriage? So there is a lot of growing literature which is analyzing that child marriage is universal. It has high prevalence in some countries, in some regions. The absolute numbers in South Asia are so staggering, because also when you look at the populations like India and Bangladesh. But what is causing child marriage? Why? And we know it's preventable. Child marriage is preventable. This is mostly adults who are marrying girls. There are very few cases, they exist, of young men, adolescents among themselves having sex and then getting married. They are there, but they are anecdotal. They are not many. So we are talking about adult men marrying. It's a heterosexual phenomena. It's mostly men marrying women. It's not in same-sex relationship mostly. So we have to be very clear in terms of naming where this violation is happening, and naming it in order to find solutions, that it's adults who are abusing children. And it might be men marrying girls, but it's also women who are complicit. At times, they are complicit. And as I go into the causes, it's also analyzing how patriarchy works. How child marriage is the nexus between values, poverty, insecurity, and lack of services. And at the center of it is this girl who is then highly vulnerable and who is then exploited for different reasons. It's it's an example of the intersectionality of values. It's that confluence of values, of inequalities, of poverty, of patriarchy, and of failure of provision of basic services to girls, which is resulting in child marriage. So the causes, we always hear the causes that it's about culture and traditions. This is why it is termed as a harmful practice. I'm a human rights lawyer, and I practice the criminal law. I believe that cultures have been, and religions have been hijacked by patriarchy, and they've become the conveyor of patriarchy. It's not that my culture, which is a beautiful African culture where we can sing and dance, where we can celebrate our diversity, should not be abused by criminals who are simply pedophiles, who are raping our children, and say, it's my culture. It's not my culture. Culture is being expropriated by people who simply want to violate girls and who are then protected by patriarchal values in order to say, it's my culture, it's my religion. No, it's not. It's not. We should reject the interpretation of text, of religious text, to rationalize the abuse of girls. Most religious traditions, Mona, you are some of the experts in these areas. Most religious texts protect the values of our faith, are the values which value humanity, the theologies of love, of good neighborliness, of protect the least amongst us. I'm Catholic. I'm a feminist who is a Catholic, and there's no contradiction. I separate my theology from the hierarchy, in the bureaucracy. Definitely, my values, my religious values, are about the fullness of humanity, which is about coexistence. It's not about marrying off little girls to gratify the sexual pleasures of predators. It's not. We have to reject the arguments which continue to rationalize, because the more we use religion and culture, the more we are told we cannot address this issue, because unless you are from that culture, unless you are from that religion, you have no right to question. So it's a protection mechanism which is around using religion and culture the law has to apply. So it's very important that the cause, which is said is religion and culture, yes, we need to dismantle that interpretation. Is there, that assumption is there, but we have to fight it. It's an issue of poverty. Yes, it is. Child marriage is so much associated with poverty, and it's immoral to use that word. How can we have a world so full of plenty, and yet parents are so poor, or girls are so desperate that they are not able to continue with education, and therefore the assumption is, if I get married, maybe my life would be better? Or parents are so struggling that they would say, okay, maybe if she gets married, she would have a better life. We cannot allow that to happen, even in Africa. My Africa is not poor. African women and girls are poor, but my Africa is not poor. We have the gold, we have the diamonds, we have the agricultural potential, we have the oil, we have trillions of dollars leaving Africa in illicit financial outflows, we have lots of money being lost to corruption. We cannot allow the argument of poverty in the midst of possibilities. It's about political choice. It's about our leaders, our governments, putting resources which build the capabilities of households to have enough income, to generate enough internal capability, jobs, income, to be able to send their girls to school. So this poverty argument for me is an argument which speaks to the face of the current economic policies that we have, which are leaving the majority on the margins when the resources could be used in order to protect our children. No argument about, oh, because the school is far. Hey, construct a school near. Oh, because the girls do not have enough sexuality education. Why can't we have more health workers, provide more information, more booklets in schools? Oh, the girls are struggling to manage their mensas and hey, provide the sanitary wear. Let's do menstrual health education. Empower the girls to negotiate the relationship. It's not a question of resources, it's a question of decision making. We have to say what it is, and that is what it is. It's about people in decision making having to make the appropriate and the right decisions with the resources that we have in this world. The resources we have in this world are for the children of this world, and definitely there is a gap. There is not sufficient respect to provide for the resources to go to the children. Yes, the argument that is used is it is a result of conflict, insecurity, movement of people, and so the young women get exploited, they become part of the combatants, or they're in the refugee camps, they are vulnerable. Stop the war. Simply stop the war. If we stop the war, we create more security. We create more opportunities. My own sister, I come after, she didn't finish her primary school because it was during the war. There was no school to go to. And she married. She married these combatants. She looks much older. She looks, my sister, the one who I come after, did not have the same opportunity I had because of the damn war. If we didn't have the war, she would have continued in class. Her story is my story. We just have to say child marriage is preventable. We can't argue on poverty. We can't argue on conflict. We can't argue on norms because these are things within our control. The argument often used is that the girls cannot negotiate relationships. So they end up being exploited. They need sexuality education. Yes, we do need sexuality education. Yes, I grew up in the village. I went to town when I was a big girl with big breasts. Somebody had to hold my hand to cross the road. But honestly, I could negotiate certain things about it. I knew if somebody is violating my territory, I felt it and I knew it. What we need is simply for the violators to back off and not to put pressure on the girls and say the girls have to behave differently. They are girls. Growing up requires understanding your body, requires entering relationships. So it's very important. So just want to move to the last key points around the consequences of child marriage. We know that child marriage results in death, literally. Maternal mortality is very high. HIV prevalence is high among adolescent girls. It results in dropping out of school with millions of girls who are out of school. It just cuts the opportunities for girls. So what the AU campaign has been doing is to say, what do we need to do in order to secure rights? What are the key elements that needs to be there? We need legislation that protects. We need national laws that set that the age of marriage is 18 with no exception. So we remove the exceptions. In many countries, there is always that law which says age of marriage is 18, subject to family, except where there's family consent or where customary law provides. So the position is, if we have to protect, there should not be any clawback clause. We just need age of 18 to be age of 18 without consent, without any clawback clause. We protect if and when our law enforcement is able to do its job. When there is a violation and there is a report to the police, there is a court case, that needs to be totally addressed in its completeness. Currently, at times the cases, when they are brought to court, the sentence is this minimum sentencing. At times there is not even a follow-up with the investigations and the case just drops out. Or at times there's fear of even reporting, because how do you report your father? How do you report your uncle? How do you report the same man who is providing you? So the issue around provision, who is providing for the girls when they enter into marriage, is very critical. And we have to address that as part of securing rights, because it means at times we don't access justice because there is no fallback position. And so the issues of shelter and rescue places are very important in order to do mediation and to find opportunities that are there. We secure rights by the women's movement. We really need a massive civic organizing to speak out, to speak up, to speak always, to provide services, to influence legislation, and to push for appropriate intervention, especially when it's people in positions of power who are abusing. But it's not enough to secure rights like we have with the African campaign and with the Africa Common Position on ending child marriage. We must unleash potential. We must unleash potential. The potential of those who are at risk and the potential of those who have experienced child marriage. How do we unleash potential? Education. Education is key. Education for girls to be in school, to remain in school, to complete their education. And if she has experienced teenage pregnancy or child marriage, to have the possibility of re-entry and coming back to school. We know many countries, including Tanzania, are putting very tight laws to say, once you are out, you're out. You can't come back into formal education. Honestly, the right to education is for every child and for every person, irrespective of your status and circumstances. So we need to push for re-entry programs, for re-entry into education, special scholarships. And this is what drove me to set up the Girls Opportunities Fund, because the girls unleashing potential is much more complicated. When a girl who is in marriage or was in marriage wants to come back, she has to think about childcare. She has to think about who pays the fees, because your parents might no longer be interested in paying your fees. This guy who you are staying with, whom you don't love, may not even want you to go back to school. And so we need resourcing of the girls who experience child marriage for them to be able to come back to school. Economic empowerment. We need economic opportunities. Give them jobs, income generating projects. Be involved in something which rebuilds the economic self-worth and the social self-worth. because child marriage comes with a lot of stigma, a lot of exclusion. And for us to unleash potential, we really need to create a space where we can provide those opportunities for the various girls that and young women that have experienced child marriage. And unleashing potential is about safe spaces. When Kosa, you shared with me, I had goosebumps. I am like, how many young women at the University of Massachusetts or in the community in this city have gone through your experience? Do we have a once a month place where you meet, share experiences, find support to each other? Because it's needed. Is that something which any of our gender institutes and human rights institutes could do? A once a month, 1 hour peer support to simply say, I'm rebuilding, it's nasty, it's tough, it's because it's a journey. Unleashing potential is not an event, it's a journey which requires a complexity of web of support, including addressing psychosocial support and fear and trauma. Some things which might be very much hidden. I started Rosaria Memorial Trust to say we have to unleash potential at scale. It cannot be anecdotal because the numbers are not anecdotal. If it's 12 million a year, imagine the millions out there, and imagine the millions who are at risk. So we need a robust approach that allows us to connect the discourse, continue to build the discourse, keep the public discourse very much alive. I'm just excited about this university, and I'm thinking in my mind, beyond this talk, how can you continue the conversation? Either it's research, deep dive research, which includes policy engagement with the US government, on also the practice in this country, or policy research that can link with the Commission on the Status of Women, and we're able to connect more the academia with the practice and the policy. Because what I see is that globally and in Africa, there's huge work happening at community level in practice, huge interventions happening, government stepping up, but we don't have a strong, robust academic intervention to inform, to guide, to influence, and to connect the various dots. We need that. We really need that. So I want to conclude by saying, in honor of my late mother, I had to set up the trust to contribute to the prevention on ending child marriage, but also to be part of the infrastructure of support to girls who have experienced child marriage. I also want to deeply thank many who have been part of my experience, including the worldwide WCA movement, where it has been possible to say, I can speak about my rights, my faith, and seek for justice without compromising, whilst advancing human rights. I can talk about contraceptives, talk about all the issues, because we must dare to be feminists. We must dare to be human rights advocates. We must dare to ground ourselves within our spirituality, however you define it. But at the end of the day, it's about affirming that everybody is born in dignity and in rights, with rights. Everybody is born with the inherent integrity within which we should strive to protect. And everybody has unlimited potential, which is limited by policy, by practice, and by bad decisions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Nyaradzayi, for a very informative and an insightful speech. I think we need another round of applause. Okay, so we have about 15 to 20 minutes for discussion now, which will also allow us, maybe 5 to 10 minutes afterwards, to have a conversation also, maybe personal conversations with the speaker. So I think I will take a few questions, and then Nyaradzayi can respond to those. Any questions, comments? Mona? Yes. You want to come back?
Pushback you must get from conservative patriarchal cultures that I am myself very personally familiar with, where like the women's bodies are supposed to reflect the family honor, and that they have the possibility of teenage pregnancies, and then that then the only resolution, there are only few resolutions, and none of them are positive for the women, obviously. So thanks.
Thank you. First is when I work strongly with religious and cultural leaders. The models that we adopt is the conversational models. This is why we had to do our Nanga Binti space, our safe space for conversation. There are certain things which we can push as a public discourse. There are other things which we just need to. There are many moments when we need to go into the closed door and talk about honor and ask the questions. What is more honorable? Is it honorable to have an old man being seen coming out of a house with a little girl early in the morning? What does it feel to the children of this man? So it's just questioning male behavior, which is seen as normal, but which is actually the abuse we are talking about. It also requires, for us, pushback requires the girls to have the voice themselves. We really need to create safe spaces where young women who have experienced child marriage are able to speak truth to power, including religious and cultural leaders, and be able to say, I'm here. This is my 3rd or 4th pregnancy, and I'm 17, and I'm living with HIV, and I'm your daughter from next door. Is this honorable? We need the voice and the visibility. It's so important. Most of the work on ending child marriage has been where girls are a poster, or they are a statistic, or they are a footnote. So we need to give voice and visibility in a way that they are able to engage, because what society is doing is to give responsibility to the young girls in marriage. You are a mother, you are a caregiver, but they are not given the right to be responsible, in the society. So in many churches, they are sitting at the back of the pew, they cannot participate in the mothers' union, they can not be on the front, and yet they are revered for being mothers, and their political space of engagement is narrow. So we need to create space for conversations to happen directly in order to push back on the issue. I really like that we have Chief Chimuka in Zambia, we have Chieftain Kachindamoto in Malawi, we have many chiefs in Zimbabwe who have said, I will not give validation or recognition of marriage in my community of any child under the age of 18. And they've annulled many child marriages. So we need more of those public declarations and public acts. They need to be more visible, because that's how we do the pushback. I think also the other pushback, when we are at the Commission on the Status of Women, we need feminists from the religious communities to speak out, because we we have the same authority. An Islamic scholar who is a feminist and a woman can raise issues and stand on the authority of text. Equally is a female bishop in a church. She can speak to her peer. So we also need feminists within religious institutions to be part of the core champions in order to do the pushback. So yes, it's a question of content, but it's also a question of strategy and tactic in order for us to push the conservative voice.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Yes. Could you please introduce yourself first?
My name is Tamara, and I've actually personally seen quite a lot of child marriages. My family comes from really rural areas in Brazil, and a lot of girls are married off young as well. But I actually wanted to ask, what changed personally for you that made your story different from your mother's, where she wasn't able to have the same help and support that you did?
Three things changed for me. Come from a beautiful country, Brazil. I was there once. Three things changed for me. One is our mother did not want any one of her 6 daughters to go through what she went through. And she would talk about it, but she would be very vocal in the community when another girl was at risk, or her house was now a house of refuge. Other girls would come, or other mothers would come to her and say, this is what is about to happen. So she became a source of the mother hen in the village, protecting not only herself, her own, but also others. So of the 650 million women living today who experienced child marriage, each one of them has a potential to be a champion and an advocate. We just need to facilitate the space for them to tell their stories, to do the healing, and for them to speak out. That's a huge number of champions out there, because no woman would say, it was good, I can go through this again. So that was one. 2 was education. I talked about my sister. My sister married because there was no school to go to. I was much younger. But because I was able then to continue in school, it meant that I was protected. Definitely there are certain things which my mother could do, but the pressure out there could be so overwhelming for girls. So we need education. We need programs that keep girls in school. It's so important, because then they are able to have another layer of social protection. The third, which was very important, was I was involved with other girls. We need girls to be involved with other girls. We need young women to be involved with other young women. To the students here, get involved on things happening on campus. Don't just come to class and go back to your rooms and come to class. Be involved in something, because there are certain skills, certain insights, and that becomes also part of like a place you can go to and say, you may not say much, but it's your space. So it was very important for me to be involved in the youth groups, the youth networks. It made me talk to my friend Axilia a little bit more. It made me not miss sport, because sport is really good. It gets us involved have other skills which also enables us to negotiate relationship things. And one of my teachers said, if you are good in class, guys are afraid of a bright girl, so they back off a little bit. They don't quickly come to. So I don't know whether that is true. That was a male perspective. It might have been. Yes, please.
Hi, my name is Madison. I was fortunate enough to attend a few sessions of the CSW this year. early forced and child marriage. Heard from a speaker from Pakistan. Thank you. Heard from a speaker in Pakistan who was talking about a school program that they had initiated that integrated sexual health, like sexual value systems, and education into the classroom. They used a lot of role playing. They included, it was a co-ed program, so that boys and girls were both having these conversations, talking about like how they envisioned and how they planned to go about the coming years of their adolescence when they would start making these relationships and thinking about such things. I just wondered if you had any experience or any insight on the value of integrating boys and girls into these lessons and starting younger in the conversations that we have about what marriage is going to be like and what your relationships are going to be like.
You're raising a very crucial point. It is important. We have to redefine masculinities. In many of our societies, adolescent boys and adolescent girls are given contradictory information around sexuality education. In my society, often it's like, for you to be a man, you have to be macho. You need to have a girlfriend, you need to, and there could even be talk of, have you ever slept with a girl? You know? That is the socialization to boys. The socialization to girls is, don't play with boys, like play, just having a friend. Don't play with girls, don't sleep with boys, cross your legs, or different kind of message, different kind of house rules. The sons could come home like after 8 o'clock. Oh, you're back. Oh, yeah, mom, I'm back. The girl must be home by 5:30. So different rules for children in the same household. So we need to redefine the way we raise our children around sexuality so that there is consistency of messaging. That message is about respect. Respect the self first. Respect the other. Negotiate. Where you are not sure, ask. Don't be forced to do anything you don't like. So there is in many countries health education is part of the school curriculum. Some call it family education, some call it family guidance and counseling education, various models. There is a hesitancy, and it's a huge negotiation at the Commission on the Status of Women to talk about comprehensive sexuality education and say it should be age appropriate, it should be culturally sensitive. Those are some of the discussions, but I agree with you that we need to redefine a new form of masculinity so that there is a reorientation of boys to positive masculinity, which is less about aggression and more about respect and coexistence. And at the same time, we also need, because it's part of the whole discussion on role of men and boys. So I always put the men in 3 buckets. For the boys, yes, let's do the resocialization. But for the men, the older men in positions of responsibility must simply be responsible. I don't understand how a man who is 50 years old, who is a member of parliament, would plead that my mother did not raise me well, this is why I married this girl. It just doesn't make sense. Because there are more and more these arguments of, oh, let's engage men, let's involve them, this is why they are not aware. No, every father should know that the best for their child is for the child to be in school. I don't think they need their old mother to tell them that you need to raise your child and your children to be in school. So men in positions of responsibility, be responsible. Do what you have to do on your expected role. If you are a police officer, do what you have to do. If you are a medical officer, do what you have to do. if you are a head of state, on my continent, the majority of parliamentarians are men. The majority of heads of states are men. The majority of judges are men. They should just do the right thing where they are. Make the right decision about resource allocation. Make the right decision about policy. Go home, hug and love your wife. Do not have a sidekick, as you say, who is a school-going child. That is abuse. So we just want men in positions of responsibility to be responsible, honestly. And we need men to be role models for their sons. Be role models. I want my son to know that he can look up to his uncle, to his neighbor, be role models. Don't say to this young man, if you need a place to hang out with that girl, you can come to my house, my wife is not there. No, be a role model. If this guy is saying, I need a place to hang out with my girlfriend who is 13, just say, that's not even a conversation to go into. You cannot be dating a 13-year-old. We need male role models who can properly advise the boys. And yes, we need resocialization. We need resocialization of the boys. And at the same time, we also need to empower the girls. We also need to empower the girls to know what to say, just like me, I didn't have a decent underwear when I had my first period. That underwear, you have to tie a little extra knot in order for the pad, it was not even a pad, it was a piece of cloth, to hold. But I knew that one day I can even drive my own car. One day I can be who I want to be. We need our girls to know that poverty is transient. Poverty is not a state of permanency. Some of us have lived this poverty, have smelled it. It has been part of almost on our skin. It's transient. We can work. We can find ways of standing up tall for ourselves. We cannot say in life, for me to make it, I have to be married to a man with money. For me to be a girl who is good and respected in the community, I need to be dating a guy who has a good car. No, just know that you can buy your own car and you can give this guy a lift. We need to empower our girls to know that they can stand on their own, they can help their sisters, and they can remain respectful and have a fulfilling life, and have an enjoyable relationship, and have an enjoyable sex. Because they may sit in that car and you have a nice guy, handsome looking, lots of money, but if you are being raped, yes, simply being raped, he just wants you for sexual gratification. You go home, yes, with a nice little pair of pants, but you are feeling so bad inside. So for me, this child marriage and the conversation around it, feel good about who you are, because there is no other you under the sun. Of the more than 7 billion people under the sun, I always say to the young women and to the girls, there is no other you at all, at all, at all. So you're precious, you're good. Just feel confident within and continue to find ways in which you can have social and economic empowerment. Then it's easy to get your voice and be politically empowered to claim your own space.
Well, we've come to the conclusion of our event. I would like to again thank Nyaradzayi very much for such an inspiring conversation, and I particularly appreciate the call for collaboration, or maybe over research or feminist advocacy in various spaces. I think that's really a great idea, and this campus, actually in this campus there are many students who are activists, who are organized in many ways, working around different issues. The advanced topics in human rights class, of which this keynote speech is a part. It is part of the human rights minor, which is, by the way, for students who do not know much about the students about the human rights minor, is an interdisciplinary minor here within UMass Boston, which is open to all students. If you are interested in joining the minor, please contact Professor Ilora Chaudhary at the Women's and Gender Studies Department, who is the director of the minor, or Brittany here. And just before we end our conversation, I very much would like to thank you all for attending this talk. I would like to thank the various students who attended. I would like to thank the core faculty of the Human Rights minor for attending the event. And also many thanks to the various departments that co-sponsored the event, as Carol mentioned earlier on. We are thankful to the Department of Political Science, the Department of Conflict Resolution, Human Security, and Global Governance, the Graduate Consortium in Gender, Culture, Women, and Sexuality, the Center for Women in Politics and Public Policy, the Consortium on Gender, Security, and Human Rights, and the School for Global Inclusion and Social Development. Thank you very much, everyone, for supporting this event.